the history of Indian philosophy in the 6th to 5th centuries BCE is deeply intertwined with the religious movements that arose in the Ganges plain. During this time, two of the most influential spiritual leaders emerged: Gautama Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, and Mahavira, the 24th Tirthankara of Jainism. Both movements grew out of the broader religious climate of the Brahmanical traditions, ascetic reform movements that challenged the Brahmanical orthodoxy of the Vedas. On the surface, Buddhism and Jainism share a number of similarities. Both reject the authority of the Vedas. Both emphasize karma and rebirth. Both teach the importance of liberation from the cycle of saṃsāra. And both arose as radical critiques of ritualistic Hinduism. Yet, despite these commonalities, the Buddha often criticized Jain doctrines and practices, and in many dialogues preserved in the Pali Canon, he directly debates Jain ascetics, referred to as Nigaṇṭhas. Understanding why the Buddha was against Jain teachings requires examining not only philosophical disagreements, but also the practical, ethical, and social differences between these two schools. Jainism was an older Commonalities tradition with a strong emphasis on asceticism, extreme nonviolence, and self-mortification. Mahavira taught that liberation was possible only through the eradication of karma by rigorous austerities and absolute non-harming, known as a high asceticism. Jain monks practiced nudity to renounce possessions, refrained from all forms of agriculture, to avoid harming organisms, and followed strict dietary restrictions that sometimes made survival itself a challenge. They believed the soul, or jiva, is bound by karmic particles, and only through severe penance can these bonds be burned away. From the Buddhist point of view, such practices were extreme, impractical, and unnecessary for achieving true liberation. Buddha's early life provides context for his opposition to Jain-like austerities. After renouncing his royal life, Siddhartha Gautama practiced severe asceticism for 6 years, following teachers who taught meditation as well as those who endorsed radical mortifications. He nearly starved himself, ate so little that he became emaciated, and endured harsh practices with the belief that such suffering would lead to liberation. But eventually, he realized that extreme self-denial brought neither wisdom nor freedom, only weakness of the body and dullness of the mind. It was this realization that led him to discover the middle way, the balanced path between sensual indulgence and self-mortification. Because Jainism so strongly represented the path of extreme austerity, it was natural for the Buddha to criticize it, presenting his middle way as the superior alternative. Philosophically, one major area of disagreement was the nature of the soul. Jainism asserts that each living being has an eternal, individual soul, the jiva, which is inherently pure but trapped by karmic matter. Liberation means freeing this soul so it rises to the top of the universe and remains in eternal bliss. Buddhism, by contrast, is founded upon the doctrine of Atman, or no self, which teaches that there is no permanent soul, only aggregates of body and mind that arise and pass away. To the Buddha, clinging to the belief in a permanent soul was itself a form of ignorance and attachment that hindered liberation. Therefore, Jain metaphysics contradicted the very essence of Buddhist philosophy. When Buddha debated Jain monks, he often pointed out that their idea of an eternal, unchanging soul could not explain the constant flux of human experience, nor did it resolve the problem of suffering. Another area of criticism was Jain karma theory. The Jains saw karma as a form of subtle physical substance that literally clings to the soul through one's actions. Every movement, even unintentional, could attract karmic particles. Liberation required exhausting old karma and preventing new karma through absolute restraint. This led to practices such as avoiding walking on grass, filtering water, wearing masks to prevent inhaling insects, and strict fasting. The Buddha rejected this material view of karma, instead teaching that Karma is intention. For him, only volitional action rooted in greed, hatred, or delusion created karmic consequences, while unintentional actions were morally neutral. This distinction made Buddhist practice far more practical, focused on mental discipline rather than ritualized restraint. The Buddha also criticized the Jain emphasis on physical austerities as the path to liberation. According to the Jain worldview, suffering was not only unavoidable but desirable, since it burned away karmic matter. Many Jain monks engaged in prolonged fasting, self-inflicted hardships, and even voluntary death by starvation, known as salikana. The Buddha, however, taught that suffering is already inherent in existence, and liberation comes not from adding more pain, but from understanding the nature of suffering and uprooting ignorance. He argued that torturing the body does not bring wisdom, and that one can attain enlightenment while living in moderation and health. In discourses, he described Jain ascetics as misguided, comparing them to a man who, in order to cross a river, ties himself with stones instead of building a raft. Another reason the Buddha opposed Jain practices was their social impracticality. Jain asceticism required such extreme renunciation that it was inaccessible to ordinary people. Very few could hope to follow such a path, which meant Jainism placed liberation almost exclusively in the hands of wandering monks, while lay followers were left with limited roles, mainly supporting ascetics and accumulating merit for future rebirths. The Buddha, however, created a path accessible to all, both monastic and lay. His teaching of the Noble Eightfold Path emphasized ethics, meditation, and wisdom that anyone could practice within daily life. By criticizing the Jain approach, he promoted his own vision of a universal path, not restricted to a radical minority. Ethically, both Buddhism and Jainism taught nonviolence, but the extent differed dramatically. Jain ahayask was absolute, extending not only to humans and animals, but also to plants, microbes, and elements. Jains considered it sinful even to light a fire, for fear of killing tiny beings, and avoided farming, which harmed the soil. The Buddha endorsed nonviolence, but within practical boundaries. He taught compassion and refraining from killing sentient beings, but did not forbid agriculture, cooking, or medicine. He accepted that life involves unavoidable harm, but emphasized intention and mindfulness rather than absolute avoidance. Thus, his critique of Jainism was also a defense of a more balanced ethical system taught in recorded debates in the Pali Canon. The Buddha frequently engages with Nigaṇṭhas disciples, the followers of Mahavira. These encounters highlight both the rivalry between the two sects and the intellectual exchanges of the time. The Buddha is portrayed as out-arguing Jain ascetics, exposing contradictions in their logic. For example, he questioned how karmic particles could stick to a soul if the soul is immaterial, or how suffering can purify the soul when suffering itself is conditioned. He often emphasized that liberation comes from wisdom and insight, not from mechanical asceticism. Such critiques show why the Buddha was seen as opposed to Jainism, not merely as a rival tradition, but as a fundamentally different understanding of spiritual practice. Historically, this opposition also reflects the competition for followers. Both Buddhism and Jainism spread rapidly in northern India, attracting kings, merchants, and commoners. Monks of both sects traveled, taught, and sought patronage. In this environment, polemics against rival schools were common, as each needed to define its identity in contrast to others. The Buddha's criticisms of Jain practices were part of this process of differentiation. By rejecting Jain extremes, he positioned his teaching as the rational, moderate, and universally applicable path. Despite his opposition, it is important to note that the Buddha did not express hatred toward Jains. His criticisms were philosophical and practical, not personal attacks. In many accounts, he even praised Jain sincerity, discipline, and commitment to nonviolence, though he believed their understanding was incomplete. This nuanced relationship shows that his being against Jains was more about clarifying his path and guiding people away from what he considered errors, rather than outright hostility. Over time, both traditions coexisted, sometimes peacefully, sometimes in rivalry. Jainism remained a smaller but persistent community, while Buddhism spread across Asia. The middle way, with its rejection of both sensual indulgence and harsh asceticism, became the hallmark of Buddhism's identity. The Buddha's opposition to Jain extremism helped define this core principle. His critiques reinforced the idea that liberation is achieved not by torturing the body or denying life, but by transforming the mind through wisdom, meditation, and compassion. In summary, the Buddha was against Jain teachings because they embodied the very extremes he had renounced: belief in an eternal soul, a materialist view of karma, radical austerities, and impractical ethical demands. He believed these doctrines led to suffering without leading to true liberation. By offering a more balanced and accessible path, he distinguished Buddhism from Jainism and provided a spiritual framework that could be embraced by monks and lay people alike. His opposition to Jain practices was therefore a crucial part of shaping Buddhism's unique identity in the religious landscape of ancient India. Thanks for watching. Our channel is new and needs your support. In our channel, you can find many videos on the history and philosophical teachings of Buddhism. Please subscribe to our channel to support the teachings of Buddha on YouTube. Can download our app from Google Play. Get notifications, daily quotes from Buddha, guided meditation methods, articles about Buddhist wisdom and sutras from Pali Canon. Discover inner peace, cultivate mindfulness, and unlock the infinite wisdom of the Buddha with this app. Download link below.